The city outside had not yet awakened when I pushed open the door to my penthouse. Manhattan was still asleep beneath a silver fog, and for once the silence felt heavier than usual. My tie hung loose around my neck, another night of meetings and meaningless voices echoing in my head. The elevator chimed, the doors closed behind me, and all I wanted was quiet. But then I heard it, a soft laugh light as air coming from the living room. It wasn't supposed to be there. I froze for a moment, half convinced I was imagining things. The sound came again, warm and real. Through the narrow gap of the half-open door, I saw her, Sophia Morales, the new maid, no more than 25, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders, her bare feet brushing the cold marble floor. She was standing in front of the tall mirror near the window, holding her phone up, smiling in a way that didn't belong to this place. She was wearing my shirt, the white one I hadn't touched since my divorce 3 years ago. The fabric slightly oversized, draped softly over her frame, the sleeves too long for her wrists. It looked almost fragile against her skin. "Do you see it?" she said into the phone, laughing quietly, her accent coloring every word with warmth. "It's his shirt, the Billionaire boss one." Don't tell me I don't look rich now. The friend on the other side of the video must have laughed because Sophia did too. The sound caught me off guard. I hadn't heard laughter in this apartment for years. The last time anyone had laughed here, the walls were painted with someone else's perfume, and I had thought love could survive silence. I stepped closer, the floor creaking under my shoes. She froze. The phone slipped from her fingers and landed on the rug with a dull thud. Her eyes met mine through the mirror. For a heartbeat, everything stilled, the city, the air, the space between us. She turned slowly, her face draining of color. "Mr. Ward," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." I didn't let her finish. I should have been angry. I should have fired her on the spot. That's what the version of me from a year ago would have done, the man who measured everything in ownership and control. But standing there watching her clutch the edge of the shirt, as if afraid it would vanish, I saw something else. I saw someone trying to remember what joy felt like. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something too. Not power, not pity, just recognition. She dropped her gaze, fumbling to unbutton the shirt. "I'll change, sir," she whispered. "I swear I didn't mean to disrespect you." I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "Keep it. It looks better that way." She blinked, confused, searching my face for mockery or anger, but found none. "You're not mad?" she asked quietly. I almost smiled. "No, you made this place sound alive for a moment. That's more than I've managed in years." Her lips parted, but no words came. Only silence settled between us, the kind that wasn't heavy but human. I could see her breathing small, uneven, honest. The early sunlight slipped through the curtains and painted gold across the marble, touching her hair, her hands, the edge of the shirt. It was too intimate for strangers, too gentle for an accident. I turned away, not because I wanted to end it, but because I was afraid of what I might say next. "Go ahead." I murmured, my voice rougher than I expected. "Finish your call." She hesitated, unsure whether I was serious. When I met her eyes again, I wasn't looking at an employee. I wasn't looking at someone beneath me or someone who'd crossed a line. I was looking at a woman who, without knowing it, had walked into the emptiest room of my life and made it breathe again. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years building machines that could see everything, faces, patterns, secrets. And yet, I had never learned how to be seen myself. She adjusted the cuff of the shirt nervously, her hands shaking, just enough to betray her. I could have looked away, but I didn't. I couldn't. Because in that stillness, in that unspoken exchange, something shifted. I wasn't the CEO anymore. I wasn't the billionaire with too many zeros and too few memories. I was just a man who had forgotten what warmth looked like until it stood in front of him, barefoot and terrified. He looked at the maid in silence, I thought not as a billionaire boss, but as a man who missed being seen. The thought wasn't poetic, it was truth, the kind that hurts a little because it's real, the kind that makes you realize how long you've been invisible, even in the brightest rooms. She bent to pick up her phone, her cheeks flushed. "I'll delete the video," she said quickly. "Please don't fire me." I exhaled, the tension breaking. "I'm not firing you," I said. "Just don't lose that smile next time. It suits the place." For a moment, she looked at me differently, curious, almost tender. Then she nodded and hurried toward the hallway, her footsteps light but echoing. When the door to her room closed, the laughter was gone again, but the silence felt different this time. Not empty, just waiting. The sun climbed higher, filling the room with light. I stared at the mirror where she had stood moments ago, her reflection still clinging faintly to the glass. For reasons I couldn't name, I smiled back. "I've lived in this apartment for 6 years, but it hasn't felt like home for even one. The penthouse sits 50 stories above Manhattan, a world of glass and steel where everything gleams, but nothing feels alive. The city sprawls beneath me, like a living circuit board, millions of lives, moving, laughing, colliding. Yet up here silence rules. My name is Ethan Ward. People like to say it as if it carries weight. They talk about Ward Tech, the company that built the AI vision systems used in cars, phones, and city grids. To them, I'm the man who can see everything. They don't realize I can't see myself anymore. Success, I've learned, is a clever disguise for loneliness. Every morning I wake up to walls that remember too much and a schedule packed with noise. But the noise never fills the quiet that follows me. My ex-wife Claire used to say I lived like a ghost in my own empire. She wasn't wrong. She had wanted more photos, followers, fame. When she left, she took her designer clothes, her entourage, and every ounce of warmth this place had. She left behind one thing, that white shirt, the same one Sophia wore. I'd left it on a chair the day we last spoke, before the lawyers, before the headlines. For 3 years, I couldn't bring myself to move it. It became an artifact of something I'd rather not name. Then a stranger wore it, and the silence cracked. I didn't fire Sophia. I told myself it was because I didn't want another staff turnover, but that wasn't true. The truth was harder. I needed the sound of someone who still believed joy was possible. Over the next few days, she kept her distance. I'd hear the soft hum of her cleaning or the rustle of fabric as she moved between rooms. Once she left a vase of fresh tulips on the kitchen counter. No note, no explanation, just color where there had been none. I stared at them longer than I should have. My days were consumed by WardTech's expansion meetings and investor calls. I'd built a machine that could scan 1 million faces and identify them in less than a second. Yet I couldn't name the last person who had looked at me without expectation. The irony was almost cruel. During a board presentation one afternoon, my mind drifted back to the sound of her laugh. I caught myself smiling and immediately shut the screen. The others didn't notice. They never did. They only saw the title under my name. CEO genius. Asset, not man. When I got home that evening, the penthouse lights were dim, and I found her in the kitchen stacking dishes. She looked up, startled. "I was just finishing up, sir," she said quickly. "Sophia," I corrected her. "You don't have to call me that." She hesitated, unsure. "Okay," she said softly. "Ethan." The word felt strange and human in her mouth. "How long have you been in New York?" I asked. "A year," she replied. "I'm studying interior design. Cleaning helps pay the tuition." Interior design, I repeated more to myself than her. "That explains the tulips." She smiled faintly. "I just thought the place looked like it forgot how to breathe." I didn't answer, but her words stuck. The next morning, she rearranged a few books on the shelf, lined them by color instead of title. It shouldn't have mattered, but somehow the space felt lighter. That evening, she left early. The apartment slipped back into its mechanical rhythm. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and the city below glittered like 1,000 indifferent stars. I poured myself a drink and stood by the window, staring at the skyline. From this height, people looked like data points, predictable, programmable, safe. Maybe that's why I preferred them that way. Real humans were messy. They broke things, said the wrong words, left when you needed them most. Still, when I closed my eyes, I saw her reflection in the mirror. The way she looked frightened and free all at once. The way she made the shirt look alive. That night, I opened a file on my laptop, labeled Art Do Not Open. Inside were sketches from another lifetime face's hands. The way light bends through glass. Before Ward Tech, before the money, I had wanted to be an artist. My mother used to tell me that painting was how you saw the world with your heart. She died when I was 12. I stopped painting the next day. Now, decades later, I found myself staring at a blank canvas I hadn't touched in years. I picked up a pencil. My hand trembled as if afraid of permission. I drew her first, the line of her shoulder, beneath the oversized shirt, the way her hair caught the morning sun. The image wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was the first honest thing I'd made in years. The next morning when she arrived, I was already awake. She glanced at the half-finished sketch on the table and froze. "Is that me?" she asked. I nodded. "I hope you don't mind." She stepped closer, her eyes tracing the lines. "You made me look peaceful." "You were," I said simply. She blushed, then smiled, a quiet kind of smile that didn't need words. When she left the room, I realized I was still holding my breath. The days that followed blurred together, filled with meetings and headlines, but something had shifted. The apartment no longer felt like a museum of lost things. There was movement again, traces of life in the corners I'd ignored. And through it all, that shirt kept reappearing, washed, folded, worn again. On cleaning days, as if it belonged to both of us now. Sometimes I'd catch her reflection in the window, sunlight turning her hair gold, and for a moment, the distance between us felt almost human. Sometimes the quietest rooms are the ones screaming the loudest, and sometimes, if you listen long enough, you hear someone else breathing in the silence with you. The morning after she saw the drawing, Sophia was quieter than usual. She moved around the apartment with her usual precision, folding towels and straightening cushions, but something in the air had changed. She no longer looked at me as if she worked here. She looked at me as if she had seen behind the glass. I tried to work, but my thoughts kept returning to her expression. When she saw the sketch, that strange mix of disbelief and tenderness. She had said it looked peaceful, as though she couldn't imagine herself that way. The truth was I couldn't either. Peace wasn't something either of us had seen in a long time. Days passed in that fragile rhythm until one Sunday morning, I found her sitting by the window, sunlight pouring over her shoulders as she sipped coffee from a chipped mug. She was wearing that same white shirt again, tucked in this time sleeves rolled to her elbows. It looked less like a mistake now and more like a quiet rebellion. "You're early," I said. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, smiling faintly. Too much noise in my head. I knew what that felt like. For a while, neither of us spoke. The city below was just waking up, the first sounds of traffic, humming faintly through the glass. It felt oddly normal, like two ordinary people sharing a morning. A week later, everything changed. I was in my office when I got a notification. On my phone, someone had tagged my name in a post. I didn't use social media often, but curiosity made me open it. The image stopped me cold. It was Sophia standing in front of the window in my shirt, the same moment I had walked in on weeks ago, but captured in perfect light. The caption read, "Billionaire's Maid or Model." The post had already been shared thousands of times. Comments filled the screen, some cruel, some lewd, most mocking. They didn't know her name, but they knew mine. Ward Tech CEO, richest under 40 rumored scandal. My heart sank. I scrolled again, half hoping it was fake. It wasn't. The photo came from her private account, one she had thought only close friends could see. Someone must have saved it, reposted it. It spread like wildfire. By noon, my PR manager was calling, her voice sharp. "Ethan, we need to contain this. You can't be seen with her. She needs to go now." I didn't answer. I just stared at the picture. The world saw a headline. I saw the same innocence that had broken my silence. When I got home that evening, the penthouse lights were dim. Sophia was waiting by the kitchen island, her phone clutched in her hand, eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she said before I could speak. "I deleted it, I swear, but it was too late. Someone saved it, and now it's everywhere." Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean for anyone to know where I worked. I just wanted to share something that felt happy." She looked at me as if bracing for the impact. I should have said something, anything, but all I could do was stand there watching her crumble under the weight of something she never intended. There saying things she whispered, horrible things. I walked over, but stopped halfway. If I reached for her now, it would only make it worse. "It's not your fault," I said quietly. "It's the world we live in." She shook her head. "It is my fault. I should have known better." "You're human," I replied. "That's all you did wrong." She looked up at me, then eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, the air between us trembled. Then the phone rang again, my assistant, urgent, relentless. "They're drafting a statement," she said through the line. "You need to deny any relationship. Say she was an employee acting without permission." The words made my stomach turn. "And if I don't," I asked, "then Ward Tech loses investors. You lose your board." I hung up. Sophia stood there waiting for the verdict. I wanted to tell her I didn't care that I'd burn the company to protect her, but the truth was more complicated. There were contracts, shareholders, 1,000 invisible chains around my wrists. That night, I sat in my study as the city flickered below headlines, rolling across my screen. "Billionaire boss and the maid," sighed Ethan Ward's secret affair. Lies built on air, but air still burned when it filled your lungs. When I saw Sophia the next morning, she was dressed to leave. Her suitcase was small, the kind of bag some people carry when they don't expect to come back. "They said you'd fire me," she said, her voice steady but hollow. Are they right? I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her she could stay, that none of it mattered. But words are easy. Truth costs more. You should go, I said finally, at least until it dies down. Her eyes glistened. And if it doesn't, I swallowed hard. Then I'll find a way. She nodded, lifted her bag, and walked past me. When she reached the door, she turned back. You could have said something, she whispered, even one word. The door clicked shut behind her, and the sound echoed like a verdict. That night, the penthouse returned to silence. The tulips had wilted, the coffee mugs were gone, and for the first time, the emptiness felt earned. I looked at the mirror where she had once stood and realized something cruelly simple. This was what the world wanted from me. To be powerful, untouchable, unseen. But I couldn't stop thinking about that photo, about the look in her eyes when the camera caught her. She wasn't showing off. She was just alive. And for a brief moment, so was I. The days after she left felt longer than the nights. The city kept moving engines, humming headlines changing. But the silence inside my apartment had a different weight now. It wasn't peace anymore, it was punishment. Every shadow looked like her, every echo sounded like her voice. I stopped checking the news, but it didn't matter. My face was everywhere. They called it a scandal. To me, it was a reminder that I'd failed someone who never asked for anything except honesty. I found her phone number once in the employment file, but never dialed it. Cowardice hides well behind logic. I told myself she needed space, that my silence would protect her. The truth was simpler. I was afraid she'd never pick up. One night, I returned to the penthouse after a late meeting. I poured myself a drink and stared at the old sketch I'd drawn of her. The lines had smudged a little, but her eyes still carried that fragile peace I'd seen once and ruined. The power went out, suddenly plunging the apartment into darkness. It was strange how quiet everything became when the hum of electricity vanished. For the first time in weeks, I could hear my own breathing. I lit a candle and sat by the window. Somewhere in that silence, I thought of my mother. I could still hear her voice, soft, distant, full of fatigue. She used to hum while painting, lost in her world of colors and half-finished dreams. My father was a stockbroker, the kind of man who filled rooms with orders and left none for love. When she died, they called it an accident. I knew it wasn't. On the note she left written in shaky ink were 5 words that never stopped haunting me. I just wanted to be seen. I was 12. At her funeral, no one cried except me. My father never spoke of her again. He remarried 6 months later, and our house filled with polished laughter that never reached me. By the time I turned 18, I'd decided being seen wasn't worth the pain of being misunderstood. So I built Ward Tech. I built walls. I built an empire that could recognize every face on earth, but never the one in the mirror. The candle flickered, and I stared at the flame until my vision blurred. I wondered if Sophia had someone to talk to, someone who knew her story. Or if, like me, she carried her past in silence. When I closed my eyes, I saw her again, not as the maid or the woman in the viral photo, but as she had been that last morning, standing in the doorway, hurt but unbroken. I envied that strength. A week later, I couldn't take the stillness anymore. I needed to understand what had shaped her, what had carved that quiet resilience into her bones. Through an old reference from the hiring agency, I found she had once lived in Texas. The woman on the phone didn't say much, only that Sophia had been through a lot before leaving. That was enough to make my chest tighten. A few days later, I found myself in the charity wing of Ward Tech, signing off on community housing projects. It was supposed to be routine, but I ended up walking into a small workshop on the ground floor. The walls were lined with paintings raw, untrained, but powerful. And there, hanging near the window, was one that stopped me cold. It showed a young woman standing barefoot in the rain, her face turned upward, eyes closed, light breaking through storm clouds above her. At the bottom corner, in tiny letters, was the signature S. Morales. I traced my fingers over the initials and whispered her name under my breath. A volunteer told me she had donated the piece before leaving Texas. Said it was about freedom, he explained. Said it was the first time she painted something without asking permission. I thanked him and walked out before my voice betrayed me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing her painting her laughter, her apology. The next morning I sat down at my desk and opened a blank page. For hours I wrote not a report, not a press statement, just words. I wrote about the loneliness of being admired, about how money builds cages out of marble, about how kindness is the only language that still makes sense. I didn't know it then, but it was the first letter I ever wrote to her. Meanwhile, across the city, she was trying to rebuild. I didn't see it firsthand, but I imagined it. Her small rented room, the cracked mirror, the sketchbook filled with ideas that didn't pay bills. I imagined her waking up before dawn, taking the subway to a diner, saving every dollar for tuition. And I imagined her pretending she didn't check the headlines, pretending my silence hadn't hurt. If she had known what I'd been through, maybe she would have understood. But I hadn't told her because that would have meant admitting weakness. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled through the city. The power went out again, and I found myself lighting another candle. As the flame danced, I remembered the last conversation we'd shared before everything fell apart. She had been cleaning the living room when she paused by the window and said, "People always tell me what I should be, but no one ever asks who I am." I hadn't known how to respond, so I said nothing. That was the curse of my life silence where words should have lived. "Maybe we're both a little invisible," I had finally said. She'd smiled then, not because it was funny, but because it was true. The memory hit me with the force of something pure. I realized I hadn't lost an employee. I'd lost the only person who ever spoke to me without seeing the price tag first. A few weeks later, Ward Tech's board called an emergency meeting. They wanted to reinstate me as CEO after my temporary leave. I walked into the room, listened to their plans, their projections, their damage control strategies, and all I could think was how little any of it mattered. When the meeting ended, I stood and said quietly, "I won't be coming back." They stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I walked out, took the elevator down 49 floors, and stepped into the rain without an umbrella. The world felt raw, cold, alive. For the first time, I wasn't hiding behind glass. Somewhere out there, Sophia was breathing the same air, living her truth, painting her way out of the dark. I didn't know if our paths would cross again, but I knew one thing for sure. The next time I saw her, I would not stay silent. The first time I saw her again was not in person, but through the reflection of a cafe window in Brooklyn. I had started wandering after I left Ward Tech, drawn to small corners of the city, where people still spoke softly, where mornings smelled like bread instead of ambition. That's where I saw her behind the counter, her hair tied in a messy bun, wiping down tables while the espresso machine hissed in rhythm with her movements. For a second, I thought I was imagining her, but when she turned and that same light touched her face, I knew it was real. I didn't go in that day. I watched from across the street, half afraid of what my presence might do into her world, now that it finally looked calm. The next morning I went back. She was arranging pastries behind the glass when I stepped inside. The bell above the door rang softly. Her eyes lifted and widened slightly. "Ethan," she said, "not Mr. Ward, not sir, just my name. You found me." I shrugged, pretending to look casual, though my heart beat too fast. "You make a good cappuccino." Thought I'd test the rumor. She smiled faintly, then motioned to the counter. "Black coffee, no sugar, right?" She remembered. She made it herself, sliding the cup toward me with quiet precision. I took a sip, then said, the only thing that felt honest, "You look better." She nodded. "I'm trying." It became a routine. Every morning I'd come in just before the rush, take the same seat by the window, and she'd bring me coffee. Sometimes we talked about nothing, the weather music, the stubborn pigeons that refused to leave the street lamp outside. Other times she told me bits of her life, each word a small piece of a puzzle she didn't know she was sharing. She lived in a small studio above the cafe, saving money to finish school. She painted again, mostly late at night, when the city's noise softened into something she could breathe through. I told her about leaving the company, how it felt like shedding armor I'd worn too long. "You built something huge." She said once, her tone neither impressed nor pitying, just curious. "Why walk away?" Because it stopped meaning anything I said. When everything you build is designed to watch people, you start wondering if anyone's watching you back. She looked at me for a long time before saying softly, "Maybe you were looking for someone to see you, not something." That line stayed with me. She didn't know it, but she had just given words to the ache that had followed me all my life. From then on, mornings felt different. The world outside still spun fast, but inside that small cafe time slowed. I'd sit with my coffee while she hummed to old jazz tunes playing from the radio. Sometimes she'd lean on the counter and tell me about her design sketches, tiny apartments she wanted to make, beautiful spaces that could breathe. "You're good at making things work," I said once after she showed me a napkin sketch. She laughed. "I just want people to feel safe where they live." Maybe because I didn't for a long time. I didn't push her to explain. I'd learned that some stories reveal themselves when they're ready. One morning I arrived earlier than usual. She was sitting alone, head bent over a sketchbook, drawing something by the window. When she noticed me, she closed it quickly, embarrassed. "What were you working on?" I asked. "A redesign," she said with a small smile. "Of what? Of your apartment?" She answered shyly. "You never asked, but I kept imagining how it could look if it felt like home." She opened the sketchbook just enough for me to see. It wasn't just furniture or colors, it was life. Plants near the window, a warm rug under the coffee table light, coming in soft instead of sterile. She'd even drawn 2 cups on the counter. "You remembered everything I said quietly." "I remember details," she replied, "especially the things people forget they need." That morning I stayed longer than usual. When she went to clean a table, I watched her move with quiet purpose, the kind of grace that comes from rebuilding yourself piece by piece. I realized I didn't miss the company or the success. I missed moments like this, real small, unrepeatable. As weeks passed, our mornings became something sacred. No promises, no expectations, just 2 people who found peace in the same hour each day. Sometimes she'd bring a muffin and split it in half. Sometimes I'd bring fresh tulips like she once did for my kitchen. It wasn't love in the loud way people talk about it, was something gentler, rooted in recognition. One morning she wore that white shirt again, freshly pressed, tucked neatly into jeans. When I noticed, she smiled mischievously. "It's just a shirt, Ethan." "Not to me," I said before I could stop myself. She looked down, a flush rising on her cheeks. "I washed it, I swear." "I didn't say I minded," I said, and something unspoken passed between us. For a second it felt like the world outside that window didn't exist, just the smell of coffee, the sound of jazz, the soft rhythm of her breathing. When a customer entered, the moment broke, but the warmth lingered. That night, back in my apartment, I realized I hadn't felt alone all day. The silence didn't ache the way it used to. Her laughter had filled it in ways I didn't know were possible. Sometimes connection doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding a cup of coffee, wearing your shirt, and reminding you that life can begin again after the world has already ended once. The morning everything broke, again started like any other. The air inside the cafe smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans. Sophia was laughing with a customer, a sound so light it almost felt like it could hold the place together. I sat in my usual corner, scrolling through messages I had ignored for weeks. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. Then my phone buzzed, first once, then again, then a dozen times. I frowned and opened one. It was from my former publicist. "You need to call me now." My stomach tightened. Before I could type a reply, I saw the photo. Someone had snapped a shot of me and Sophia at the cafe, mid-laughter, her hand brushing mine across the table. The headline read, "Billionaire Ethan Ward's Secret Morning Romance Exposed." Beneath it, a collage of older pictures, the viral image from months ago and new ones from today. It didn't take long for the story to spread. I heard my name whispered on the street, saw my reflection plastered across digital billboards I hadn't authorized. I looked up from the phone and saw her eyes on me. She had seen it too. Her phone was lighting up on the counter, messages pouring in faster than she could delete them. She looked pale, like someone who had just realized the ground beneath her feet was no longer safe. "It's happening again," she whispered. "Ethan, what do I do?" I wanted to tell her not to worry, that I'd handle it, but I had said that before. The last time I stayed silent, she lost her job. This time I couldn't let it happen again. "Go upstairs," I said quietly. "I'll talk to them." But before she could move, a man in a gray suit walked in, the same PR officer who once handled my scandals. "Mr. Ward," he said under his breath, pretending to order coffee. "The board is furious. They want a statement by noon. You can't let this spiral." "There is no board," I said flatly. "I'm not their CEO anymore." He leaned closer. "You think that matters? The company still carries your name. You can't afford this. She can't either." I followed his gaze to Sophia. She was staring at the ground, clutching her apron like it was the only thing holding her up. "If you care about her," the man said coldly, "you'll deny it again." When he left, I felt the same suffocating weight I had known once before. The choice between truth and survival. Outside, news vans were already parking along the curb. Cameras, microphones, the scent of chaos. Sophia looked at me like she was bracing for another betrayal. "You're going to say it's not true, aren't you?" she asked. "You're going to pretend I'm nothing again." "Sophia." I started, but she cut me off. "Don't. I've been through this before. I know how this works. People like me don't belong in stories like yours." You think I care about their stories, I asked. I don't. Then say something, she said, her voice trembling. Say it where they can hear you. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. The last time I spoke out, the world twisted every sentence until it became a weapon. The silence between us turned sharp. You can't, can you? She said bitterly. You still think silence protects me. It's not that simple. It never is with you. She took off her apron, tossed it on the counter, and walked toward the back door. I followed her outside into the alley where the first drops of rain began to fall. Sophia, I said, my voice breaking. Please. She turned, eyes wet but fierce. You said once that I made your place feel alive. But Ethan, you only feel alive when it's safe. You want to be seen, but you hide the second someone looks too close. Her words cut deeper than I expected. I reached out, but she stepped back. I'm done being invisible for someone else's comfort. She walked away, and I didn't follow. The cameras found me before I could leave. Questions flew like arrows. Is she your girlfriend? Did you buy her silence? Are you exploiting her? I pushed through the noise, got into the car, and drove aimlessly until the city blurred into gray. The rain came harder. I pulled over near the river, the same spot where I used to sit with my mother before she disappeared into her own silence. I thought about Sophia's voice, about how she had asked for something so simple, just for me to speak. I couldn't, because once you've built your life on quiet words become dangerous. That night, the cafe closed early. I returned hoping maybe she'd be there, but the lights were off. Through the window, I saw the sketchbook she always kept near the register. It was open to a page, half-finished, 2 figures drawn in pencil. One standing, one sitting, both facing away from each other. Above it, written faintly, were the words, "Not every silence is peace." I picked up the sketchbook, closed it gently, and left a note beside it. For once, I wish I knew how to say the right thing. By morning, the story had gone global. News anchors debated whether I was hiding an affair, journalists speculated about her past, and strangers online tore apart her name without ever knowing it. The cafe locked its doors for good 2 days later. I tried to reach her, but the number was disconnected. The landlord said she moved out overnight, and just like that, she vanished again. My world went quiet, but not the way I liked it. This silence wasn't peace, it was loss thick and unmoving. For the second time, I had watched her walk away because of who I was, and this time there was no one left to blame. The rain didn't stop for 3 days, and I didn't either. I walked through the city like a ghost, realizing that every empire I built meant nothing if the person I wanted to find shelter in it had to run from it to survive. I had thought my silence could protect her. I hadn't realized it was the thing that kept breaking her. The weeks that followed felt endless, every day bleeding into the next with a dull ache I couldn't shake. I returned to the penthouse once out of habit, more than desire, but it no longer felt like mine. The walls that had once contained her laughter now echoed with a silence so sharp it made me flinch. I sold the place 2 weeks later and disappeared from the skyline that used to define me. I told the press I was retiring, stepping away from the empire I had built. The truth was simpler. I couldn't bear the view from that height anymore. I found a small apartment in Brooklyn near the river, the kind of place where the floorboards creaked and neighbors argued through thin walls. It wasn't luxury, but it was human. I started volunteering at a community art program, a space for people who couldn't afford gallery lessons. I didn't tell anyone who I was. They didn't care anyway. They just called me Ethan, the quiet guy, who brought coffee and fixed the broken easels. For a while, that was enough. But some nights when the workshop emptied and the smell of paint lingered in the air, I'd sit by the window and wonder where she was. Whether she was safe, whether she still painted. I imagined her somewhere far from the noise, maybe back in Texas, maybe starting over again. Every time I thought I could move on, I'd see something that brought her back the shape of someone's hands brushing hair, behind an ear, a flash of white fabric in a shop window. The sound of laughter, too much like hers. Grief, I learned, doesn't scream. It lingers in small things. One evening, after locking up the art studio, I walked to a nearby cafe to get warm. The rain was steady, the kind that turns the city into a blur of reflections. As I waited in line, something on the wall caught my eye, a painting. It wasn't large, but it was unmistakably hers. A man in a white shirt, standing in silence, his face turned away, but his shadow stretched long and human across a gray floor. The title written beneath, in small, neat letters, read, "The Man Who Forgot to Speak." My chest tightened. Beneath her signature, faint but visible, were initials I hadn't seen in months. Esmeralda's. My coffee went cold in my hand. I asked the barista where the painting came from. A local artist, she said. She donated it last month. Said it was for the community fundraiser. I wanted to ask where she was now, but the words wouldn't come. I just nodded and sat by the window, staring at the brush strokes that felt like confession. It wasn't anger I saw in that painting. It was forgiveness wrapped in sorrow. I went back every day for a week, hoping maybe she'd return for another piece, but she never did. The painting stayed there watching me as much as I watched it. One night after the cafe closed, I walked along the river. The water moved slow, catching glimmers of streetlight. I thought about the last time we stood in the rain, how her voice trembled when she said she was done being invisible. She had been right. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just makes the pain quieter for the one who causes it. I sat on a bench and took out my phone. For months I had avoided it, but that night I searched her name again. There wasn't much. Her social accounts were gone, but a local newsletter popped up. It mentioned a new designer volunteering at a youth center, teaching art and interior design to immigrant teens. The photo was small, grainy, but I knew that smile anywhere. It was her. The next morning, I took a train across the city. The center was tucked between an old church and a grocery store, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking. Kids ran through the hallway laughing, their hands covered in paint. I asked the woman at the front desk about Sophia. "She's not here today," she said. "She teaches on weekends. You can come back then." I thanked her and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't sure I deserved to step into. Over the next few days, I poured myself into work at the art program, but my mind kept wandering to her. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before Ward Tech. The first piece I finished was of her standing in sunlight. Her face turned slightly toward the viewer, but her eyes cast downward. I called it the moment between words. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt like I understood what my mother meant when she said painting was how you see with your heart. A month passed before I gathered enough courage to return to that youth center. It was a Saturday morning, the air cool and clear. When I walked in, the sound of children's laughter filled the room. And then I heard her voice steady calm, instructing a small girl how to blend colors on a canvas. She was wearing a cream sweater, her hair loose, her smile soft and sure. I froze in the doorway watching her. She looked different, lighter somehow, but the same warmth radiated from her. I didn't approach her that day. I couldn't. She looked too free, too complete, without my shadow over her. I turned to leave, but as I did, I caught sight of another painting drying on the table beside her. It was a simple image, a white shirt, hanging in sunlight. Beneath it, in small cursive letters, she had written, "Freedom wears no uniform." My throat tightened. I left without saying a word, but as I walked away, I realized something had shifted inside me. This wasn't distance anymore, it was consequence. And maybe that was what I needed to learn, that sometimes the only way to love someone right is to let them have the silence they choose. Still, every morning when I walked past the cafe with her painting on the wall, I'd whisper her name under my breath, not to summon her back, but to remind myself that she had existed, that I had seen her, and for a moment she had seen me too. I didn't plan to find her again. Some meetings aren't planned, they happen, because the universe runs out of ways to keep two people apart. It was raining again, that day months after I'd last seen her painting of the shirt. I had gone to drop off some donated supplies at the same youth center where she taught a box of sketchbooks and pencils. I didn't even know she still worked there. But when I stepped through the door, shaking rain from my coat, I heard her voice. It froze me where I stood. "Make sure you blend from light to dark," she told a young boy holding a paintbrush. "Don't rush it. Art is about patience." Her voice was calm, measured the same rhythm that had once filled my mornings with peace. When she turned, our eyes met across the room. For a heartbeat, no one else existed. The rain outside faded, the sounds around us blurred, and all I could see was the surprise softening into something unreadable in her gaze. She excused herself from the class, wiped her hands, and walked toward me. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Her expression guarded. "I know," I replied, "but I needed to be." We stood in silence for a moment, the distance between us smaller than it felt. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small box, not velvet or polished, just plain wood, with a faint scent of cedar. I came to return, something I said, setting it on the table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a stack of papers, design blueprints, budgets, and an envelope on top. "What is this?" she asked. "An investment proposal," I said simply. "For your studio." She blinked, confused. "Why? Because you build things that matter," I said. "Because you create spaces that make people feel seen." She shook her head slowly. "You can't buy your way out of silence, Ethan. I'm not trying to." I said, my voice softer now. "I'm just trying to start over with words this time." Her eyes searched mine, cautious but trembling on the edge of belief. "You left me to burn alone," she said finally. "You watched me lose everything again, and you said nothing." I thought silence was mercy, I confessed. I was wrong. It was cowardice. I told myself I was protecting you, but really, I was protecting myself from the noise of being human. She looked away, blinking hard. "You don't get to walk back in and fix it like it's a project, Ethan. People don't work that way." "I know," I said. "I didn't come to fix it. I came to tell you I'm still learning." Her lips trembled, and for a long while she said nothing. Then she stepped past me toward the window. Rain streaked the glass, turning the city outside into a watercolor blur. "Do you know what I hated most about all of it?" she said finally. "It wasn't the lies. It wasn't even losing the job. It was realizing that the world would rather believe I was something to hide than someone worth defending. I closed my eyes, each word landing heavy. You were worth defending, I said. Then why didn't you? Because I didn't think I deserved you, I answered honestly. You were brave, you were light, and I was still learning how to step out of the shadows. She turned, then eyes bright with anger and sorrow. You don't wait to be ready to do the right thing, Ethan. You just do it. The room was quiet, except for the sound of rain. I took a step closer. You taught me that. And I know I'm late, but I'm here now. And what are you asking for? She said, her voice steady. Forgiveness, I hesitated. No, just a chance to mean something again. Her breath caught. You already did, she whispered. You showed me kindness once, and that was enough to change my life. But that doesn't mean we get to go back. I nodded slowly. Then let's not go back. Let's build something new. She studied me for a long time, her face unreadable, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden box. You really think people like us can start over? I don't know, I said, but I think people like us don't stop trying. She smiled, then faint and sad, but real. It was the kind of smile that meant she was still standing, still open to the possibility that life could surprise her again. We talked for hours after that, not about the scandal, not about the past, but about art. The children she taught, the studio she wanted to open one day. When the rain finally stopped, she walked me to the door. The air outside smelled of earth and renewal. I don't know if I can trust you again, she said quietly. Then let me earn it, I replied. Not with words, but with presence. She nodded once, almost to herself. You can come by next week. The kids love visitors. It wasn't an invitation to her heart, but it was a door. And for someone like me, who had lived behind glass for so long, that was enough. Over the next few weeks, I returned every Saturday. Sometimes I brought supplies, sometimes I just listened. Watching her work with those kids, seeing her patience and light, I realized she no longer needed saving. She had saved herself, but she still let me stand near that light. One afternoon, as the center closed, we lingered in the doorway. The sun was setting behind the buildings, spilling gold through the windows. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The company, the power? No, I said. I miss coffee. She laughed softly, the sound warm and unguarded. You could have just said me, she teased. I didn't want to make it obvious. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was full alive. I took a deep breath. Sophia, there's something I should have said the first time we met. She tilted her head, curious. What's that? When I saw you wearing my shirt, I didn't see an employee breaking rules. I saw someone reminding me what real looked like. She didn't reply right away. Then she said gently, You can't build a life out of a single moment, Ethan. I'm not trying to, I said. I just want to build one where moments like that don't have to end. Her eyes softened, and for a long heartbeat, she didn't look away. Then she reached for my hand, a small gesture that felt like forgiveness. Maybe, she said, but only if you promise no more silence. Deal, I said, closing my fingers around hers. Outside the city pulsed with life again. But this time, the noise didn't scare me. It sounded like belonging. It sounded like us finally learning how to speak. A year later, the world looked different, not because it had changed, but because I finally had. I no longer lived in penthouses or attended board meetings. My mornings began with coffee brewed slowly in a chipped mug, the kind Sophia once used at the cafe. We didn't rush anything, not even us. What grew between us wasn't some cinematic whirlwind of passion. It was steady kind built from all the small things that had survived the storm. The scandal had faded like old ink. People had moved on to new stories, new headlines, and for once I was grateful for the short memory of fame. Sophia had opened her studio in Brooklyn, a place she called Scene Spaces. It wasn't large, just a single-floor workspace, with wide windows, paint-streaked tables, and music always playing low in the background. She taught young women how to design, how to turn small rooms into safe ones, how to build beauty out of what was broken. The first time I walked through the door on opening day, she looked up from across the room, her hair tied loosely, her apron stained with color. "You're late," she said, pretending to scold. "Traffic," I replied, handing her a bouquet of tulips. "You always bring flowers," she teased. "Maybe I like reminders," I said. She smiled and returned to her students, leaving me standing by the window where the afternoon light painted everything in gold. I watched her move from table to table, offering advice, encouragement, laughter. There was a softness in her now, but also a quiet authority. She wasn't the girl hiding behind borrowed clothes anymore. She had become her own kind of light. When the students left, she walked over to me, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You didn't tell me you were bringing the press," she said, nodding toward a group of journalists outside. "They're just covering the launch," I assured her. "Don't worry this time, it's your name they're celebrating, not mine." "I don't care about that," she said. "I just don't want my story to be about survival anymore. I want it to be about creation." "It already is," I said. "You built this from nothing." She glanced around the studio and exhaled pride, mixing with disbelief. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." "Believe it," I said softly. "You made it so." That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, she closed up the studio and turned to me. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into the back room. When she returned, she was holding something wrapped in linen. "What's this?" I asked. "A trade," she said with a grin. She handed it to me, and when I unfolded the fabric, I saw it a white shirt, almost identical to mine but redesigned. The stitching along the cuffs was delicate, a thread of silver barely visible in the light. On the inside of the collar, embroidered in small letters, were 3 words: "You were seen." I looked up at her, unable to speak. "You once told me to keep it," she said quietly. "Now I'm giving it back, only this time it's yours because you earned it." I smiled, the kind that starts in the chest and spreads slowly. "You made this. I wanted you to have something that reminds you you're human first," she said. I stepped closer, touched the soft fabric, and noticed something else stitched beneath the words, a small initial SM. "You signed it," I murmured. "Every artist does," she replied, teasing. "Put it on." I laughed but obeyed. The shirt fit perfectly light against my skin. She looked me over, then said, "You look less like a billionaire now." "Good," I said. I was tired of being one. She smiled, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memories of forgiveness, of everything we'd rebuilt from the ashes. "There's one more thing," she said, suddenly walking toward the corner of the studio. She pulled a canvas from behind a shelf and placed it on the easel. "I painted this for the exhibition next month." When she uncovered it, my breath caught. It was the 2 of us standing by the cafe window, sunlight streaming in, both laughing. The moment before, the world had turned it into a scandal. But she had changed one detail. In the painting, the world outside the window was blurred, distant, irrelevant. Only the light between us mattered. You remembered that morning, I said quietly. I remember everything she whispered. I stepped behind her, resting my hand on her shoulder. It's beautiful, it's honest, she said. For once I painted without fear. You should show it, I told her. The world deserves to see this side of you. Maybe, she said softly. Or maybe this one's just for us. I stayed late that night, helping her clean brushes, closing windows, locking the door. The city hummed outside, but the studio glowed with its own quiet warmth. Before leaving, I turned to her and said, "You once wore my shirt and made me remember what life felt like. Now I'm wearing yours, and it feels like freedom." She smiled, stepping closer until our foreheads touched. "That's what love should feel like," she whispered. "Not rescue, freedom." We stood like that for a long moment, the air still the sound of our breathing, the only rhythm that mattered. When I finally stepped out into the cool night, I looked down at the shirt and saw the words stitched inside the collar again, "You were seen." For the first time in my life, I believed them. The night of the exhibition arrived like a quiet sunrise, unannounced but full of light. The gallery was a renovated warehouse near the river, its brick walls lined with canvases that told stories of survival, love, and rediscovery. Sophia's collection was called The Language of Light. Each painting held a heartbeat, a small rebellion against the idea that pain defines us. I arrived early, wearing the white shirt she had made me. It felt like armor, but not the kind that hides, it was the kind that breathes. The fabric still smelled faintly of her studio of paint and hope. People moved around the space, slowly whispering, admiring their reflections, shimmering in the glass frames. Sophia stood near the center, radiant in a simple ivory dress, her hair tied back, eyes alive with calm. When she saw me, her lips curved into the smallest, truest smile. No words passed between us. We didn't need them. The centerpiece of the gallery hung at the far end of the room, a painting larger than the rest, titled "The Man Who Missed Being Seen." It was us. The moment by the cafe window, recreated in detail so delicate it felt alive. But in this version, there was no sadness. The man's face, half turned toward the light, was no longer searching. He was found. People stood before it for long stretches of time, some silent, some visibly moved. I overheard a woman say, "You can feel the forgiveness in it." I looked at Sophia then, and she caught my gaze as if she had heard the same thing. When the lights dimmed and the host invited her to speak, she stepped forward, hands trembling only slightly. "Art," she began, her voice soft but sure, "isn't just about beauty. It's about recognition. It's about telling someone, even without words, I see you. For years I painted to forget, but somewhere along the way, I learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about turning it into light." She paused, eyes flicking toward me. "This collection is dedicated to the people who taught me to look beyond silence, to those who reminded me that being loved is one thing, but being seen, that's where love begins." The room was silent when she finished, not because the audience didn't know how to react, but because some truths demand stillness. When the applause came, it was warm and human. I walked to her afterward, the crowd thinning around us. "You were extraordinary," I said. "You always believed I could be," she replied. "You just never said it out loud." "Then let me start now," I said, taking her hands. "You are extraordinary." She laughed softly, a tear catching the light. "Took you long enough." Outside, the night was gentle, the city reflecting in the river, like a memory learning to forgive itself. We walked along the water's edge, neither of us in a hurry. The bridge lights flickered above the sound of distant jazz floating from a nearby bar. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "About how you looked at me like you'd seen a ghost." "I thought you'd fire me," she said. "I thought I should have," I admitted. "But then I realized you were the first real thing that had walked into my life in years." She smiled at that, quiet and understanding. Maybe we were both just waiting to be seen. I nodded, the air cool against our faces. Maybe that's all love is. The moment you stop being invisible to someone. We stood there for a while, looking out at the skyline. The city glowed alive and endless, but for once it didn't feel bigger than us. It just felt right. I turned to her and said, "You once said you didn't want your story to be about survival. What is it about now?" She thought for a moment, then answered, "Belonging." The word settled deep inside me. We walked back toward the gallery, the sound of laughter echoing behind us. Her hand slipping into mine without hesitation. No grand declarations, no final speeches, just two people who had learned that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet, in the forgiveness, in the simple act of standing next to someone who finally sees you. And as we stepped through the open doors, the last painting caught the glow of the streetlight, a reflection of us walking away, hand in hand, the words at the bottom, "Barely visible, you are seen." If this story reached a quiet part of your heart tonight, take a moment to breathe with it. Because somewhere, someone out there is still learning how to be seen. Maybe it's a friend who always hides behind jokes. Maybe it's you reading this right now, wondering if your story still matters. It does. It always does. Every time you share kindness, every time you choose understanding over judgment, you remind the world that compassion isn't weakness, it's courage wearing gentleness. If Ethan and Sophia's story moved, you share it with someone who might need to remember that even after heartbreak, hope can still find its way home. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of their journey touched you most. Was it the silence that broke them, or the words that healed them? Tell us if you believe love is less about finding someone perfect and more about finding someone who truly sees you. When you write, don't just tell us about them. Tell us about you. Tell us about a moment when someone saw you for who you are, not what you do. Those stories keep the light alive here in our community. If you felt something while watching or reading, that means your heart still knows how to recognize truth, and that is something rare in this world. Subscribe to Emma's stories so you won't miss the next story about love that hurts, heals, and rebuilds. And if you're watching from somewhere far from New York, from Trinidad or London or the quiet corners of Texas, drop your city in the comments. It reminds us that even across oceans, we are part of the same family of souls, trying to make sense of love and loss. Remember, this being seen isn't about attention, it's about connection. It's about standing in your truth, knowing someone out there is looking at you and saying, "I see you and you're enough." If this story brought a tear or a smile, share it forward. Let it reach the next person who needs to believe that silence can end, that second chances exist, that love can still sound like a whisper in the dark saying, "You matter." You can even tag a friend who helped you through your own quiet season. You might never know how much that small act could mean. This isn't just another romance, it's a reminder that somewhere between chaos and calm, we all want the same thing: to be known, to be loved, to be seen. So stay a little longer, leave your words below, and let's keep this circle of stories alive. Because love isn't what ends the story, it's what keeps it going.